Okay, the long-awaited Alhambra that you thought I was not going to teach. You foolish ones. Of course I'm going to teach it. The Alhambra, well, before I get into it, I want to talk a little bit about the context here. So the Alhambra is part of a long line of works that are from the Iberian Peninsula. And so when I say the Iberian Peninsula, I mean Spain and Portugal. Um, that were created by the different Muslim dynasties, right? Remember the Muslims came into Spain, right? First the Umayyad dynasty back in the 8th century. I think they may have been actually 7th century they started, but the Great Mosque, of course, is from the 8th century, and then of course we had a bit 200 years after that, the Pyxis of Al-Mughira. We have another piece today, which is the Alhambra, which is not the Umayyad dynasty, it's the Nasrid dynasty, so it's a different power group, but they are Muslim, all right? It is located on top of a very tall hill in Granada, Spain. You can imagine the benefits of putting something on top of a tall hill. Um, yes, think about the other things that we've looked at that are on top of hills and the benefits of that. Okay, so um, we're going forward. It's a large complex. We're really only looking at one small part of it, but it's a very large complex. We're really only going to be interested in looking at the Court of the Lions and the Hall of the Two Sisters, and this, which is here, kind of a detail blown up here. So this is going to be the Hall of the Sisters. This is going to be the Court of the Lions, and there are a couple of other buildings attached to the Court of the Lions. We might also talk about this whole section as being that goes around the Court of the Lions as being the Palace of the Lions, but each of these things has their own name, which we'll get into. Okay, so the Nasrids were the last Islamic sultanate in the Iberian Peninsula before all the Muslims and Jews were kicked out by Ferdinand and Isabella. And they were successful for quite a long time, and they managed to live relatively peacefully alongside the Christian rulers. The ruler of the Nasrid dynasty that we're going to be focusing on is the one who had commissioned these two, the Court of the Lions and the Hall of the Two Sisters, which is Muhammad the Fifth. And we we attribute much of what the Alhambra looks like to him, although he's not the only person who contributed to its creation. So the Palace of the Lions, the Court of the Lions, and the parts attached to the Court of the Lions, like the Hall of the King and the Hall of the Two Sisters, is the only part of the Alhambra that survived from the 14th century. And it's made up, and so the Palace of the Lions is made up of private spaces and different private residential areas, and obviously this lovely courtyard. You'll notice in the courtyard we have columns going along all sides of it. We also have this great water feature with a lot. There are 12 lions with a basin for the fountain on its back. You'll notice the water. This fountain has an intersection of 4 streams coming into it. You can't see the one back here, but you have 1, 2, 3, and the one on the other side. So the water pours out of the fountain and goes to the other sections where the water comes up in kind of bubbling, peaceful ways. The Alhambra is known for its really complex water systems, lots of fountains, lots of pools, lots of streams. So these 4 channels that the water comes to allude to the points of the compass, but more likely also the 4 rivers of paradise as well. As I mentioned, Muhammad V is our guy. And the basin is of the fountain is on top of the backs of the lions, and from the lion's jaws the water flows down, and the 12 lions that are on there can symbolize the 12 signs of the zodiac. And the zodiac would refer to the different times of the year, right? And there's a verse about the beauty of the courtyard written on the basin of the fountain, or the rim of the fountain, rather. And yes, we've mentioned before the importance of script in Islamic art, writing, the beauty of writing. And so the written poem is going to be just another example of that. So overall, we're talking about the garden being suggestive of the heavenly garden. That's the gardens of heaven that are spoken of in Islam. And so I mentioned the four rivers, the four streams, the four channels of the fountain, representing the four rivers of paradise, also possibly the 4 points of the compass. And so you have to think about the effect of water, its sound, its movement. Its intent is to inspire a sense of peacefulness and well-being. So we have this great element of this, sound of running water in this beautiful space. So I mentioned that the Alhambra is full of things like these pools and fountains and running streams. And so they're known for it's known for its really complex water system. So it is the Court of the Lions is an arched covered patio. So let's take a look at that. What I mean, right? So I see arches, right? And I see that we have this courtyard. And the arches offer a roof, so it's covered, right? So an arch covered patio, and we have these beautiful slender columns and this stucco decoration here, very lace-like, right? Very delicate, right? The columns are also very slender. The columns do not bear weight. They are simply decorative. But what do we have? We have a courtyard that's surrounded on all sides with columns. So that would be called what? Think back to Temple of Amun-Ra. That would be called a peristyle court, right? We also have arch after arch after arch after arch. So this would obviously be an arcade. That would make these spandrels, right? And so the spaces on the four sides of the courtyard are royal residences. And one of them is going to be the Hall of the Sisters, which we'll get into in a moment. We can see there's writing on the capitals here, right? I mentioned again the importance of the beauty of script, right? And the capitals are not any kind of capitals we've seen before. They're kind of square or rectangular shaped. And the script written on it praises Muhammad V, right? So again, as I mentioned, they are not weight bearing. They're purely decorative, and they're really astonishingly beautiful. We have these not concentric, but ringed impressed circle decorations here for the horizontal movement and vertical movement of the fluted part here, which gives way to a more floral decorations here. And then we have the writing. So this is an incredibly complex setup for the columns. The Hall of the Two Sisters, which is one of the spaces. Let me show you again. Hall of the Two Sisters, right? We're talking about this area. So Hall of the Two Sisters is here. This is the Court of the Lions. That's where the fountain would be, right? So Hall of the Two Sisters is called so because it has these two large pieces of marble on either side of the water feature, right? And the two large pieces of marble together, they're kind of considered like they're sisters, sister pieces of marble. That's why it's called the Hall of Two Sisters. And so here's the water feature that would carry water to the fountain in the middle of the courtyard. So the water would kind of spurt out of this little spigot here, and it would draw down, and then it would, yeah. So the water goes back and forth and back and forth. There is another poem by Ibn Zamrak, right, who was the writer of the poem that is on the rim of the basin of the fountain in the courtyard, and the poem is about the dome in the Hall of the Sisters, right? So we have some more writing espousing the beauty of the place. And we haven't looked at the dome, but we can kind of get a sense up here. It doesn't look like any dome we've seen before. Okay, I mentioned where we are. Okay, so here's the dome of the Hall of the Two Sisters. Of course, we've seen domes that have squinches before, right? And domes that have windows at the bottom, but we haven't seen anything like this. These are called macarnas, and they're kind of like little honeycombs, right? So they're like little tiny buds. They look very organic, but they are arranged in a highly geometric fashion, right? They kind of look like the beginnings of a growing cell. And I mentioned they're also called honeycombs, or they look kind of like honeycombs. So something that is looks very organic, but is also highly organized geometrically. So we have that wonderful juxtaposition of those two things. Here's another example. Actually, this is the same one. It's just got better lighting. So this, and also has been cleaned, obviously. Here's a different dome, obviously, because it's in a star shape. But this is also full of macarnas. It's really insanely beautiful and intricate. So you can imagine what it would be like to be able to wander through the space and hear the bubbling water and the flowing water and see the light. And it was just a place to inspire a great sense of peace. Here's an example of a window view, right? In the Alhambra, there were, especially looking out on particular courtyards, there were things called miradors, 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 which are windows that give you a particular view of something below, either of a natural feature like a particular mountain, or of a special section of the courtyard where maybe people would whisper to each other. But we can see on the inside of this building here in the Hall of the Sisters, again, the decorative script, right? We see a similar column here that we saw in the courtyard of the Lions, okay? We see this beautiful tile work, and we've mentioned tile work before when we've talked about Islamic art and architecture. Think back to the Great Mosque of Cordoba, right? All right, so I want you to, even though this comes a good 700 years after the Great Mosque of Cordoba, you can see some strains in Islamic architecture that remain the same. The emphasis on script, the emphasis on tile work, the lack of figural imagery, right? But it's incredibly beautiful. All right, thanks very much. Oh, please make sure to read the Khan Academy article, as well as the recommended links that I gave you on the handout sheet about the about the Alhambra. Okay? Thanks very much.